What's going on, guys? My name is Josh and this is episode 4 of Josh Talks Tech. Today we are closing out our mini-series around BCDR and diving into disaster recovery as a service. Let's get right into it. Thank you so much for tuning in to this week's episode. If you've been following along so far, you know that part 1 was all about backup versus DR, the differences between the two because they are not the same thing. In part 2, we dove in, got a little bit more in the trenches, so to speak. We got into RTO, RPO, and point-in-time recovery. That episode was jam-packed. If you'd like to watch either one of those just to catch up, or if you missed them, there's going to be a link in the description below. Today is all about disaster recovery as a service and some of the things you should be thinking about when designing your DR plan. So without further ado, let's get right into what is DRaaS? What is disaster recovery as a service? In the last couple of episodes, we've been talking about this idea of disaster recovery. The short 50,000 foot version of it is a disaster recovery solution gives you the ability to fail over from your primary production data center if there was ever a critical or catastrophic incident that caused downtime in your production data center. Now, one of the important things to call out around DR is who's going to manage it? Who's going to actually facilitate the execution of the continuous replication between your data centers? Who is going to actually flip the switch and make sure all the resources are where they're supposed to be? Who's going to maintain that strategy? So it's important to note DRaaS, disaster recovery as a service, is exactly that, as a service. It means that somebody else, another organization, is facilitating all of the components of a disaster recovery solution on your behalf. Now, some organizations may look at that and say, well, it's going to cost me more to have someone do it for us as a service. That's not entirely true when you take into account things like licensing, as well as just the man hours associated with making sure the DR solution is doing what it's supposed to do week in and week out, testing, things of that nature. So DRaaS is disaster recovery as a service. It means that you are paying an organization to do it for you. So let's take a few minutes to talk about two things that are really critical before you go out and seek a disaster recovery as a service vendor. The first thing you should do is define your RTO and RPO. This avoids any confusion when you start conversations with potential DRaaS vendors, because it means you've thought through what you need as an organization, which means you can stay focused on things like the platform, user experience, SLAs, and cost. The second thing, and this is arguably one of the most important things that you should do before talking to potential vendors, is define what you're sizing for. What do I mean by that? So a lot of organizations, when you start thinking about DR, you think, I've got to have a disaster recovery plan for my entire production environment. So 100% of all of the data and all of the VMs that are running in production, you want to build a DR plan around 100% of that, which at face value sounds kind of practical, right? You want to protect your entire business. The reality is, in a DR scenario, you might not need 100% of your VMs and 100% of your data running out of your DR environment. So why is that important? If you can plan your DR design, your DR solution around only mission critical apps, it means that you're not sizing for 100% of your workloads. This could be 50, 60% of what's running in your production environment, which means you would be saving 30, 40, 50% had you designed to meet 100% of your workload requirement. So how do you actually size for mission critical apps only? So it's actually pretty simple. If you're running Nutanix or if you're running VMware today, you can run a Live Optics or an RV Tools report. RV Tools reports are free to run. I highly recommend that you run it during a busy time of day, so you actually get a view of the total resources consumed at peak levels of activity. Now, when you pull an RV Tools or a Live Optics report, you're going to get a breakdown of all the data across all of your VMs inside of your environment. Before you worry about analyzing all of that data, inside of each of those reports there will be a VM tab that's going to give you a breakdown of the number of VMs that you have deployed inside of your environment. The one thing that you should focus on is highlighting every single VM that you deem mission critical. As you can imagine, this might be a little bit time consuming, but the exercise is really important for you as an organization to know what VMs you're protecting and for you to know what it is that you actually need to size for. So that's it for today's episode. Let's do a quick recap. DRaaS stands for Disaster Recovery as a Service. You're going to handle all of the activities that go into a DR solution. That would be considered self-managed. That's just DR. If you want a separate organization, a technology partner to do that on your behalf and wrap it in their SLAs, that would be considered as a service. Next, when you start discussing a DR plan within your organization, the first thing you should do is identify what you want your RTO and RPO to look like. If you want to stick with 4 hours, which is the standard, great. If you need to be back up and running faster, have that well defined on the front end. And lastly, define what you're sizing for. If you want to recover 100% of your workloads running in your production environment, that would be considered a lookalike DR, where the resources in your secondary data center are going to look almost identical to the resources in your production data center. But if you want to save some money and you want to run a little bit more lean, the best thing that you can do is identify the mission critical apps that you want to run out of your production environment. Allows you to run a lean and more cost-effective DR plan while still protecting the business. The best way that you can identify what workloads these are is to run a live optics or an RV tools report that'll give you a breakdown of all the resources in your environment, so you can go through and identify what VMs you want to protect, so when you start talking to vendors, you know exactly what it is you're sizing for. Thank you so much to everybody that's tagged along so far. I know we're only 4 episodes in. It feels like a much longer time. If this provided you with any value whatsoever, please follow here on LinkedIn and jump over to YouTube and subscribe to my channel there. It would mean the world to me as I break the algorithm and continue growing this thing called Josh Talk Tech. Thank you so much. I hope you have a fantastic week, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace.